Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Beta FPV Meteor 65 Pro. And I should stress Pro because there are two on the Beta FPV website and they look identical. One is with ExpressLRS on board, which is what we're looking at here today, and the other has all the other different protocols that they offer on their receiver options. And at first blush, kind of just another Whoop, right? Well, they've made a few changes, and whenever a company makes changes, we have to check them out. So let's do that. It still comes with the 0802 SE 19,500 kV motors. Unlike a traditional Whoop, this comes with 35mm Jim Fan tri-bladed props. The camera is the C20 from Beta FPV. Of course, the flight controller in there is the F4. This is the 1S version with a 5 amp ESC, and it has built-in ExpressLRS with the plastic cube antenna inside, which we have seen on the channel before. Down inside this canopy is a power switchable VTX that goes from 25 milliwatts up to 350 milliwatts, which some people will definitely want. The battery is the Beta FPV 2.0 connector. In the flights you're going to see, although I am using the Tiny Whoop HV 333 milliamp 1S battery, and yes, it is BT20 as well. It weighs just a touch over 22 grams. And with that Tiny Whoop 333 milliamp HV battery, it weighs 30¼ grams. It does appear to be 65 millimeters, as my measurement is just a touch under that. It does come with one Beta FPV 300 milliamp battery. I also got a Beta FPV branded BT20 battery charger and a cable to go with that charger. Extra set of props, which I'm pleased to report that in all my crashing of this quad, the props did not come off, unlike the last time. Tiny screwdriver, a QR code for your user manual, and of course it did come in this case. Okay, we're going to start out with the inside flight, which is kind of my forte. It's kind of one of the things I really enjoy to do. I tend to fly in the house just about every day, unless I'm on vacation or I'm not feeling well. I think there's a couple of takeaways from the inside flight. Is one, you get a look at this camera. I don't know if this is a brand new camera or if I'm just not remembering it well. But I did have some trouble specifically outside adjusting to the warping or fishbowl of the camera. I think there could be some possible advantages possibly to having that extra wide field of view, but because of the rounding off of the view, I think it's something that you need to be aware of. I'm not sure how well that comes through in video. In this video, we'll also be taking a look at some gates that I just got. It's actually a cube gate, then I popped out the other single gates that I have from the same company, so we get to have some LED gate fun in the nighttime, so you get to see the camera and how it does in a dark scenario where there are LED gates involved. And we'll also fly it outside, and I also did some dive testing. As is the case with Whoops, it's fairly common for them to have what we call yaw washout, which is where the nose of the quad pitches up uncontrollably and suddenly, and it tends to yaw for me to the right on these things. Some do it all the time, some do it some of the time, some do it only specific instances of the time. But I always check those things out for everybody, because I know that while I might fly these exclusively or nearly exclusively inside for fun, others fly them outside. And I would say this about Whoops is that you don't need to have a big space to enjoy a Whoop inside, whether it's this one or some other one. If you watch AIO, FPV Skittles, and Rabbit FPV, Daniel and Liz Sugano, they've been hosting AIO for, is this 3 seasons now? But they have a lot of tricks or challenges that they pose in AIO, and AIO stands for International Game of Whoop, where people are doing freestyle tricks in one room, whether it's their dining room, their bedroom, or some other room that they have in their couch. So with just one room and some creativity with a Whoop, you can have all sorts of fun. I am flying in acro mode, which means no self-stabilization. It's how I'm used to flying, but many people, specifically I think about 50% of the racers, fly these in angle mode where there is self-stabilization. So if you're starting out, you just need to set up your beta flight and the switches on your radio to where you have angle mode or horizon mode set up, and it will help you stabilize the quad as far as the flight through the air. These don't hover like camera drones. They require input and they kind of move around. But as far as these quads go, you do have angle mode available to you. You see there we finished the flight and we have our battery bounce back well up over to 3.5 volts per cell, which disarmed, I want my batteries to be at least 3.5 volts per cell. And we got a flight time of just about 3 minutes. Okay, here's our outside fly. And this is a day you've seen before. I talked about it on our the Dead Bat video when I did that. And we're going to start right off with a punch. And I think outside you can kind of tell the fishbowl effect a little bit more, specifically when I'm making turns. You may notice that as you're watching it. Just be aware of it. You know, some people are very, very sensitive to different things in cameras, and other people are not so much. It did take me half a dozen flights to kind of get used to it, and had to kind of stick with flying these particular quads to make sure that I didn't readjust to some other sort of camera style. I do have some wind. Although it's a nice day, there is some wind, 11 miles an hour according to the official weather data, but it was pushing close to 70 degrees. I don't encourage people to fly these in the real dead cold because the plastic tends to get harder in those colder temperatures, and therefore it might break a little bit easier to a lot easier. But you can definitely fly these outside. You know, if you live in a windy area like I do, it's going to push you around. It's maybe going to cause some tuning issues. There isn't much weight to these, so if you're trying to do certain freestyle sorts of maneuvers, you have to stay on the throttle a little bit more to get through the maneuver because there just isn't that much weight. So if you're used to flying a 5-inch quad or really anything that's much heavier than a micro that weighs say 40 or 50 grams, then you're going to need to stay on the throttle to do them. That's just the nature of whoops. That's not specific to this one. That's just how whoops are. And you can see there as I went above the swing set, I expected to come back down on the other side, but I had to bail because I didn't have any carry whatsoever. Matter of fact, the wind may have pushed me back a little bit in that particular maneuver. I guess in that case, the wind can help us. The wind might move you more if you have the right wind direction with the move that you're trying to do. The pass along the fence, that's a staple for mine. I just enjoy that. I think I'd be hard-pressed to find a video on the channel where I didn't do that pass down round through the fence. And then I go around the swing set, and this is just kind of another area where if you're at a park with your kids, or you just have a park near you that you can go and with just a little bit of an obstacle, you can have some close proximity fun. I've done that myself where my girls used to swim. They had a underused playground and it had some of those tubes and stuff. And so when it was nicer out, I had the forethought to take them with me, I would take a couple of whoops and a handful of batteries and I'd fly while they were doing their swimming. Keep in mind that these don't necessarily dive great. You know, we talked about it a little bit, the yaw washout, and I will show you in the picture-in-picture when we get back to the desk and do our detailed discussion I'll show you those dive testing that I did. It does yaw wash out, but it doesn't do it very often. So if you do a dive from a very tall building, you may find that you get that yaw washout. Here we're going to end the end of the flight, and it's going to come in right at about 3 minutes, and our battery starts to bounce back a little bit. Keeps coming, so I got a few more seconds of flight time on the outside. I just suspect that's just a little healthier battery, and our battery has recovered back to 3.7 volts per cell. So the first thing is let's take a look at a little bit of gate flying. I am not especially adept at gates, even as often as I fly them. I just think I tend to want to push for more speed, and my speed desires go beyond my technical flying desires. These are the We Bleed FPV gates. They come, of course, from We Bleed FPV. And the cube gate that you see there, that's real new. I just got that a little while ago and set up. If you're interested in the We Bleed FPV gates, I'll have a link down in the video description. You can go to their website and check them out. They have all sorts of different patterns and colors they can display. You don't have to set them on the ground. As you can see, I've got them hanging from chairs. They come with sticky Velcro, so you could hang them from a wall, or you could put a nail in a ceiling joist if you have an exposed section of your basement or something like that. Just really any sort of creative way that you might have in order to be able to hang a gate. In the case of the cube gates, they stand up on their own. But flying with gates is an awful lot of fun. I always encourage people with whoops to get a couple of gates to have some extra fun. So this is another outside flight, and I'm just doing some VTX testing because we do have a new VTX here from Beta FPV. It is the 25 to 350 milliwatt, and you can see up there in the top right hand corner I'm running race band 8 at 350 milliwatts, so that's the maximum output, and I can circle my house. That's one of the tests that I do. I can't do that unless it's over 300 or it's 300 milliwatts, I believe. I don't think I've had any 200 milliwatt VTXs that can go around the house. And then we go over to my neighbor's place and we go down kind of around there. We're going to go around another house, so we're going to have technically 2 houses in our way as we circle that. And yes, I'm on very good terms with all of our neighbors. They all know I fly. I've shown it to them all. I've been doing this for 5+ years now. No one has any problems. As a matter of fact, if you saw the HGLRC race whoop video I did, 2 of my neighbors were like, what the heck is he doing? You know, I was crash testing that thing. And one neighbor said, whoops, I don't think that was supposed to happen. He didn't know I had cameras set up and everything to try to capture it. And so I had to explain to him a little bit. I'm doing some crash testing. This one's supposed to be indestructible. And he's like, really? It's supposed to be indestructible? You keep hitting that poor tree. And I'm like, I know, the poor tree just keeps taking it. But I did this flight specifically because of the VTX and checking out how the reception is. Of course, I am running Orca goggles with rapid fire, and I am running them in mode 1 on the rapid fire. And I have 1 true RCA antenna and 1 AXI antenna. So both circular polarized antenna, and I'm just out flying, having some fun, and getting this DVR here for your diagnosis of whether it's getting good reception or not. I think it is, but of course at 350 milliwatts at this closer range, yeah, it should. But it did go around 2 houses, which I think is pretty impressive because previously that has taken 400 milliwatts in order to accomplish. So I'm going to play some crash footage up there. That's always tedious. I'll just pull out a dozen crashes or something like that and to show those to you so you can get a fix for the durability. I think most people would agree that the Meteor 65 frames are some of the more durable frames. I see a lot of people switching from Happy model frames over to the Meteor frames, so I don't have a concern there. But one thing I am pleased to note is that the props didn't pop off. In previous iterations of beta FPV whoops, I found that in a couple of crashes that you would end up losing a prop, and as I showed you in the quick roll, I didn't even open my spare prop bag. Now, I did push these down when I got it. When I got it out of the box, they were not pushed down, and so I was able to, and I always push down with both sides on my fingernails, so I get them close to the post, and I push them both down, and they just have that final snap. And through all my crashing, at one point, after about a week of flying, I did find one of the props had worked its way back up. Of course, it didn't come off, so I pushed it back down. I think if we look at this prop here, it's not fully seated either. I can't quite, no, I can't feel the prop stem poking through like I can back here. So let me see if I can do this on camera. You might not hear it snap into place, but maybe you heard that. It just kind of snaps down, and then you have a little bit of that motor stem poking through. That helps to ensure your prop stays down. You can also see some scraping down in there. Initially, when I got this, there's something was ticking, and I couldn't figure out what it was because as I spun the props by hand, I didn't have any problems. I didn't feel any resistance from the frame, but once it got into the air, it started scraping. So apparently, it just kind of wore down the edges. I suspect it's from the lift, that there was a little bit of flex in the frame as it lifted, and that was causing the props to strike. Some of these scratches are, of course, going to be from all the different crashing that I did as well. As the case with most whoops, we don't have any camera protection, and in this case, the camera is kind of high. It's kind of proud. Other whoops have it slightly lower, or they just have a smaller lens camera using something like the Runcam Nano 4. I think it's the 4. Maybe it's the 3. It's the one with the really tiny, small lens that weighs like 1.25 grams. So this one is a little bit larger, so there's potential because it's just a physically larger object that if you hit it, it could possibly take damage. That's something that everybody has to consider. As far as the board goes, I didn't have any problems with making changes in Betaflight. One thing to note about ExpressLRS is to just use the bind button that's on the receiver tab of Betaflight. I have worked with a few people who are trying to flash the ExpressLRS receiver that's on board. That we're not doing at this time. That is controlled by Betaflight because it's kind of cooked into the Betaflight. You can do passphrase binding by going into the Betaflight CLI and making some changes in there. For me, it just wasn't quite worth it. I just used the bind button in the Betaflight configurator application and then hit bind on my radio, and I flew it around. I didn't make any other changes other than to change the hertz. To get the hertz changes, or as far as the packet rates, excuse me, I did have to manually enter that into the CLI, and I can put that command here on screen so that you know what to do. And that needs to match whatever you're running your ExpressLRS module on your radio as. So if you're running 500 hertz, then it needs to match on the board for the CLI. If you're running 200, it needs to match there as well. A few years ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, Beta FPV switched out their canopies. They used to have very brittle canopies that we kind of all coped with for a long time. They've changed to this other sort of plastic mold that's much more thick, much more robust. I would still prefer it had more than 2 mount points, specifically 3 mount points I think would be sufficient, but in this particular case you can see there's no screw coming down through there through the front. I would like to see Beta FPV develop a canopy that not only has 3 mount points for the canopy but also allows adjustable camera angle. This has got a bracket inside that kind of grabs a hold of the bottom of the camera and it screws into the top of the canopy. So getting different camera angle is going to be a little bit of a challenge. I can unscrew this real quick so we can take a look at that. So here's a look at the bottom. And we've got to look at the VTX in there. Again, that's power switchable from 25 milliwatts to 350 milliwatts. It's pretty small, looks to be pretty light. We also have a button up there. And then you can see here how the camera is held in. It's got 2 black screws there in the bottom. So that camera angle is static. I have seen in the past, but I didn't get it in my package, to where they have different brackets that can give you different camera angles. But then you have to switch those out. Again, if it were me and I were making the choices, I would have this be adjustable like they are with most other canopies, to where you have tension screws on the sides of the camera and then you make an adjustment. We have seen with other manufacturers that they'll have a cradle like this, but you can still adjust the camera angle with the screws from the outside and then just moving the physical camera. But that's a little bit of a look underneath there. And then you can see my cube antenna down here on the board, nice and small. If you're building one like this, it is worth noting that, this, if you have a mount point with your canopy, that cube antenna sticks out further. Let me grab one that I've built. Hopefully you can see right there with this Crux 3 canopy, which I do like to use those, that it just has enough clearance with this Happy model frame and the tall post that it has to keep this canopy from hitting that antenna. Now in a crash, if I were to hit hard here, that has the potential of movement, I think it will clear, but if it bends back and down, we could still hit the antenna. So I used longer metal screws through there, so my weight came up. So there's a couple of factors with being able to mount a canopy like this if you're building with this board, is that you probably want to have at least the front screw be a longer metal screw. You want to use a frame that has taller, longer posts, and then you want to pick a canopy that doesn't seat down on that post at all, that it at most goes flush and it doesn't go down below level at any point. Otherwise, that antenna is either going to make the canopy unmountable, or it's going to mean that the antenna gets damaged. And if you've damaged the antenna, then you're going to have all sorts of control link and range issues. But I wanted to make sure I showed that to you. There's just a touch of clearance between that front edge of the canopy and that cube antenna. Something else that you can also see there, and we highlighted that on the board when I introduced these boards back when they came out, is they do have nice large solder pads on here. So you could, if you were to be someone that wanted to scrape some grams off of this thing, you could take the connectors off and then solder your motor wires direct. And that would save you maybe a half a gram. Chime in here, builders. What did taking the connectors off and wire soldering straight to the pads, what does that save us? Is it a half a gram? Is it 3/4 a gram? Is it a whole gram? I can't remember the last time I did that and what the weight came out to, but I know there are some people with much better memories out there than I have, and can tell us down in the comments section, and I would sure appreciate that. Also note that the antenna here isn't secured, it's just hanging out the back, but it does have this rounded canopy, so it shouldn't get far from its home position. Let me put this back together and we'll finish up. So the last point is always price. And the price on this one is $119.99. You may find that it's available from several different vendors. If I can find it with a vendor that I have a standing coupon code with it, I'll put it down in the video description. The coupon codes that I have currently save you between 5 and 8% on those particular sites. It is a relatively new product, so if you're looking for this from one of our US-based shops, they may have it, and if they do, I will link it down below. There's a host of shops I'm not familiar with outside of the US, so you probably want to look at this from Makerfire or Banggood, or who else would it be? Directly from Beta FPV. Those places, I think, all ship out of China, so they have a better shipping reach at a better cost than, say, our US shops do. So what do you think? What did you see? I'm particularly interested in the video section and what you thought of the camera. Did that translate at all to you? Is it something that you noticed what I was describing? Do you think it's too heavy at 22 grams? You know, we recently have hit 20 grams, and Mr. Shutterbug and Angry Dawn have built some quads that are below that 20 gram marker. So do we need manufacturers to shoot for 20 grams or less? Or is 22 grams acceptable for your purposes? I know hardcore racers, you're going to be out there wanting 18.5 grams or whatnot. But does anybody race and compete at a high level with a 22 gram whoop? And keep in mind, these are 35 millimeter props, so your 31 millimeter props won't fit, or I guess they'll fit, but it won't fly right. And you should also consider the fact that depending upon your whoop racing community, 35 millimeter props on a 65 millimeter whoop might not be allowed. I don't know that to be certain, but you might want to check that out if you do race competitively. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in the comments section below. I appreciate your time. And thanks for watching.